10 miles east of Palmdale, the streetlights stop. There is a stretch of asphalt in the high desert of Southern California where the last glow of civilization fades in your rearview mirror, and for the next 40 miles, there is nothing but 2 narrow lanes, a yellow line, and the dark. Locals call it Pearblossom Highway. The California Highway Patrol has another name for it, one they don't put on the road signs: Blood Alley. Here is the number that stops people cold. On a 50-mile ribbon of pavement that most Americans have never heard of, drivers have died at a rate higher than almost any other stretch of road in the entire state. A road so narrow in places that oncoming headlights sit less than 10 feet from your driver's side window, separated by nothing but paint. There are no medians here. No barriers. Just desert scrub, jackrabbits crossing in the headlights, and long-haul trucks doing 65 inches from a driver who has been awake for 18 hours. And yet, every single night thousands of people still drive it. Some don't know what they're driving into. Some know exactly what it is and go anyway, because there's nowhere else to go. And some, the ones whose names now sit on small white crosses planted in the gravel shoulder, drove it once, and never came home. By the end of this film, you'll understand how a farm road built to move fruit out of the desert became one of the deadliest two-lane highways in America. You'll see how geography, geology, and 100 years of half-finished promises turned a shortcut through the Mojave into a place where a wrong flick of the wrist, a moment of drowsiness, or a wall of fog rolling off the San Gabriel Mountains can end a life in an instant. This is the story of State Route 138. To understand why this road became a killer, you have to understand why it was built at all. The high desert north of the San Gabriel Mountains is a strange seam in the map of California, a place where the Mojave Desert presses up against some of the steepest, youngest mountains in North America. The San Gabriels are geologically violent. They are still rising, inch by inch, pushed upward by the same tectonic grinding that gives Southern California its earthquakes. Rain that falls on their northern slopes has nowhere gentle to go. It rushes down into the flat desert basin below, carving washes that flood without warning and vanish just as fast. Into this landscape, in the early 20th century, came fruit growers. The Antelope Valley, the wide desert basin that the highway crosses, turned out to have something unusual: cold winter nights and dry summer air, ideal conditions for growing pears. By the 1910s, farmers had planted thousands of pear trees across the valley floor, and the town that grew up to serve them took its name straight from the crop, Pearblossom. But an orchard is worthless if you cannot get the fruit to market. The nearest rail lines and population centers were on the other side of the mountains, in the growing towns of the San Bernardino Valley. What the growers needed was a direct route east-west across the desert, connecting the farm towns to the wagon roads and, eventually, the automobile highways spreading across the state. That need collided with California's larger ambitions. In the 1920s and 30s, the state was stitching together a highway system almost from scratch, racing to connect desert communities, mountain passes, and coastal cities with the same energy that was, at the same moment, building dams and aqueducts across the west. A two-lane road across the Antelope Valley wasn't glamorous. It didn't need a tunnel through granite, or a bridge over a canyon. It just needed to be flat, straight, and cheap, and the desert offered exactly that. So engineers laid the road the way engineers lay roads across flat land with a limited budget: straight lines, minimal grading, no shoulders wider than absolutely necessary, and no separation between opposing lanes because, at the time, there was so little traffic that no one imagined it would matter. For decades it didn't. What eventually became State Route 138 was never built as one project. It was stitched together over decades from farm roads, county routes, and disconnected highway segments, a patchwork rather than a plan. Through the 1930s and 40s, crews working with hand tools, mule-drawn graders, and eventually surplus military equipment carved a rough alignment across the desert floor. The work was unglamorous but not easy. Summer temperatures in the Antelope Valley regularly topped 100 degrees, and winter brought hard freezes and occasional snow that turned the unpaved sections into frozen ruts. Crews battled shifting sand, seasonal flash floods that could erase a graded roadbed overnight, and a chronic shortage of funding that meant projects were paved in short segments, sometimes years apart. The road's most dramatic engineering challenge came where it left the flat desert and began to climb into the San Gabriel Mountains toward the town of Wrightwood and the pass known as Highway 18. Here, engineers had to cut a road into slopes made of decomposing granite, rock so fractured and unstable that it crumbles under its own weight, a geological condition locals still call rotten rock. Even today, this section requires constant maintenance. Rock slides and washouts close it after nearly every serious storm. Unlike California's iconic megaprojects, the Golden Gate Bridge, the aqueducts, the Coastal Highway 1 carved from cliffside, this highway had no signature engineer, no celebrated feat of design. Its defining feature was the opposite of ambition. It was built as narrow and minimal as regulations of the era allowed, because nobody planning it in 1930 could have imagined the volume of traffic it would one day carry. By the 1950s, the segments were connected into a single numbered state route. It worked exactly as intended, for the traffic levels of its time. Farm trucks, a scattering of local commuters, the occasional traveler cutting between the desert and the mountains. The road did its job quietly for a generation. Then Southern California exploded, and the quiet ended. Here is the part of the story almost nobody expects. This remote desert highway sits at the crossroads of some of the most consequential science and engineering in American history. A few miles from where the highway crosses the desert floor lies the town of Palmdale, which by the 1950s had become one of the most important aerospace testing grounds on Earth. On the vast dry lakebeds nearby, test pilots pushed experimental aircraft past the speed of sound for the first time, laying groundwork that would eventually lead to the Space Shuttle program, whose orbiters were assembled and tested in hangars visible from sections of this very highway corridor. Just to the north and west, the highway threads near the San Andreas Fault itself, the tectonic boundary responsible for California's largest earthquakes. Geologists have used road cuts and creek beds along this corridor for decades to study fault movement, because here, unlike almost anywhere else in the state, the fault scar is visible right at the surface, in plain sight of anyone driving past. And the mountain past the highway climbs toward rightward, and the ridge above it has its own improbable footnote in American history. Nearby slopes have hosted ski areas and mountain retreats frequented, over the decades, by Hollywood figures escaping the heat of the Los Angeles basin just an hour and a half away, turning a desert farm road into an unlikely commuter route between two utterly different Californias. One of orange groves and orchards, the other of jet engines, film studios, and fault lines that could someday reshape the entire region. Few of the drivers gripping their wheels on a foggy night here have any idea they are crossing a road linking the birthplace of supersonic flight to one of the most dangerous geological features in North America. The highway is not just a road. It is a scene where several different Californias meet: desert agriculture, aerospace ambition, and geological violence, all pressed together on a strip of pavement barely wide enough for two trucks to pass. And then there is the reason this documentary exists at all. As Southern California's population exploded in the late 20th century, this narrow farm road did not grow with it. Commuters from the booming desert suburbs began using it daily to reach jobs over the mountains. Long-haul trucks discovered it as a shortcut avoiding congested interstates. Weekend travelers heading to mountain resorts merged with agricultural traffic still moving at the pace of an earlier decade. All of it funneled onto the same two lanes that had been designed for a fraction of that volume, on a road with essentially no forgiveness built into it. The physics of what happens next are brutally simple. With no median and no barrier, the only thing separating a car traveling 65 miles an hour from another car traveling 65 miles an hour in the opposite direction is a painted line and a driver's attention. A single lapse, a phone glanced at, a driver nodding off after a night shift, a moment of impatience trying to pass a slow truck, closes that gap in under a second. On divided highways, that same mistake sends a car into a median. Here, it sends it into oncoming traffic. Fog compounds the danger in a way few visitors expect from a desert. Cold high desert air settles into low points along the route on winter and spring mornings, producing walls of fog so dense that headlights simply vanish into a white void a few feet ahead of the hood. Multiple vehicle pileups have occurred here in conditions where drivers could not see the car directly in front of them until it was too late to stop. Add to this the mountain descent near Rightwood, where sharp curves, steep drop-offs, and that same crumbling granite create a different kind of danger, vehicles losing control on the grade, and rockfall closing lanes with no warning. Over the years, the corridor accumulated a grim informal record, a fatality rate that periodically put it among the deadliest state routes in California, driven overwhelmingly by head-on collisions on the flat desert straightaways rather than the mountain curves people instinctively fear more. It is the long, hypnotic, dead straight sections, the ones that feel the safest, that have proven the most lethal, because straight roads invite speed, fatigue, and inattention in equal measure. Small white crosses and roadside memorials have accumulated along the shoulder over the decades, an unofficial, unbearable ledger of names, planted by families who lost someone on a road that looked, in daylight, like nothing more than an empty stretch of desert. Today, the highway is caught in a slow, difficult transformation. California's transportation agency has spent years widening select segments, adding rumble strips, and, critically, installing centerline median barriers on the deadliest stretches, the same kind of steel cable and concrete dividers credited with dramatically reducing head-on collisions elsewhere in the state. Where those barriers have gone in, the numbers have improved. Where they haven't, drivers still merge into oncoming lanes just to pass a tractor or a slow-moving truck, at highway speed, with nothing but instinct standing between them and a crash. The corridor has also become a case study in how difficult it is to fix an old road running through fast-growing communities. Every widening project competes for state funding against hundreds of other aging highways across California. Every mile of new barrier requires buying right-of-way from adjacent desert parcels, coordinating with utility lines, and managing construction on a road that cannot simply be shut down, because for many high desert communities it is the only practical route to work, school, or the mountains beyond. Climate patterns are adding new pressure. Increasingly intense winter storms have brought heavier flash flooding and more frequent rock slides on the mountain grade, closing the route for days at a time and forcing Caltrans crews into a constant cycle of emergency repair rather than long-term improvement. Meanwhile, the traffic keeps growing. The desert communities this highway serves are among the fastest growing in Southern California, drawn by housing prices a fraction of those in Los Angeles proper. Every new subdivision means more commuters funneling onto the same aging 2 lanes each morning and evening, many of those trips happening in the dark, in winter fog, on a road still only partially modernized. Drive this highway in the middle of a clear afternoon, and it can feel almost peaceful. Joshua trees standing sentry along the shoulder, the San Gabriel Mountains rising blue and jagged against the sky, the kind of open desert road that feels like freedom itself. Drive it after dark, in fog, behind a truck with a driver you cannot see and cannot know, and it becomes something else entirely. A reminder that a road is never just asphalt and paint. It is a decision made nearly a century ago about how much space human error deserves, revisited every single night by people who have no idea that decision is still being made for them. This highway did not set out to be dangerous. It set out to move Pears out of the desert. Everything that came after, the aerospace boom, the population surge, the commuters, the fog, the fault line running silently beneath it all, simply found the same narrow strip of pavement and asked more of it than it was ever built to give. Somewhere out on that road tonight, headlights are approaching each other from opposite directions, separated by a line of paint older than most of the drivers crossing it. Most will pass safely, the way they do every night, the way they always have. But the crosses on the shoulder are still there in the morning light, a quiet accounting of the nights when they didn't.